Alrighty, great. So we're getting going now. Thank you so much, comrades, for being here, taking time out of your Sunday to join us for this event. We're here to talk about the situation that the working class is facing as we head into 2025. The question of party building under Trump, building a stronger socialist project, and what our route forward looks like. There's really a lot to cover. And we have a lot of amazing and exciting panelists here from across DSA to talk and share perspectives and discuss what our route forward looks like. So we're going to just do introductions. I'm going to give it to different panelists and we're going to introduce ourselves. And then we're going to get into questions, closing statements, and that's how it's going to look. So yeah, I'm Spencer. I'm going to be our host for today. I use she or they pronouns, and I'm happy to be here with y'all. And yeah, who is going to go first? Let me give it to Nate. Why don't you go first?
Hey everybody, I'm Nate. I use they pronouns. I'm chair of the electoral committee for Atlanta DSA. I'm here as a member of Groundwork to talk a little bit about our perspective on U.S. politics. And I'm also a field director for the Gabriel Sanchez campaign. And I'll pass it to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mason. I'm one of the elected organizers of the Seattle chapter. I use he, him pronouns. I am one of the co-chairs of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus because all of us are co-chairs of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus. I worked for the Democratic Party for 6 months. I worked for the Nevada State Democratic Party. And so let me pass it to Genevieve next.
Hello, my name is Genevieve. I use she, her pronouns. I am a labor and tenant union organizer. I'm based in upstate New York, but I'm currently deployed to Michigan organizing a tenant union. I'm here as a representative of the Socialist Majority Caucus, and I was a founding sort of organizer of the Ithaca Solidarity Slate, which is a socialist slate election project. We have run 8 candidates. We have elected 4 people, and I've helped, set up and run the co-governance system and the campaigns themselves. And I also am the co-chair of the National Trans Rights and Bodily Autonomy Campaign Commission in DSA. I guess I'll pass it to Jake.
Hey comrades, thanks Genevieve. My name is Jake Efros. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a candidate for city council in Jersey City, New Jersey. I'm part of the North Jersey DSA chapter in the HUDCO, Hudson County DSA branch. I've done electoral work and helped lead a tenants' rights campaign in our Hudson County DSA chapter in Jersey City. And I'm a teacher right now. I've been in the labor movement for a little while, but I'm a teacher at Hudson County Community College and St. Peter's University now. So really excited to be here, and I'm with the Bread and Roses Caucus. So thanks so much, Arnar, for hosting this and for getting us all together to discuss. I'll pass to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Milner. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the steering committee of Reform and Revolution, who I'm representing today. I'm also the comms co-chair for DSA's National Comms Committee and the co-chair of the Trans Rights Bodily Autonomy campaign alongside Genevieve. Before that, I was co-chair of Portland DSA's Electoral Working Group, where we implemented a new endorsement policy, which we carried out to success, electing 3 endorsed candidates for the first time ever in our chapter's history this year. And before that, I was on the Portland DSA Steering Committee and the co-chair of Portland State University YDSA. I'm also a rank and file union member, active with my Reform Caucus, Building a Fighting in ALC.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. We are going to pass it to Michael. Can you introduce yourself?
Is this me? I can't see my name. Sorry, comrades, I'm driving. So, hi, I'm Mike B. I'm a member of Snohomish County DSA, which lives in the northern shadow of Seattle DSA. I'm a former co-chair of my chapter. We just won a minimum wage campaign that was modeled after the Raise the Wage my union and a member of the Washington State Labor Council, where we did pass the most sufficient ceasefire resolution of any labor council in the country. The results of that, have their implications. But that's it for my I can't actually see who's on the participant list. So Spencer, if you could call on someone next, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I think that's everyone. At least, yeah, that's all of our panelists, right? Did I forget anyone? No, I didn't. Great. Okay. So we are going to get right into it with our first question of the day. Who's ready? I'm ready. Okay. So the question is, should socialists support a break to form a new party or realignment of the Democratic Party? That's the question. And I'm going to put it in the chat so folks can see what we're talking about. And I'm going to go in this order. So I'm going to go Groundwork, Marxist Unity Group, Bread and Roses, SMC, R&R, LSC. That's the order we're doing. So Groundwork. Who is that? Nate, why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah. From Groundwork's perspective, we absolutely want to be building a working class party, an independently organized group that can represent the working class, that can put forward working class socialist candidates, put forward a socialist platform, hold candidates accountable. But it's really important that when we talk about the Democratic Party, we understand that the Democratic Party is very different from parties in other countries, and that we also have some clarity about what we're talking about. Because when people say Democratic Party, they mean a lot of different things, right? There's the Democratic Coalition. There's anybody that's registered to vote as a Democrat. I think there's a lot of people who are registered Democrats on this call probably, but you wouldn't necessarily identify as the Democratic Party. And so it's important that we distinguish between the broad coalition of anybody that votes Democrat or maybe registered to vote as a nominal party member versus the Democratic establishment, which is this political faction within the Democratic Party, which is capitalists, which is liberals, which is anti-socialist, right? In essence. And so our view is that in the long term, we do need to be building up independent political power for the working class. And we do that by running independent, socialist candidates for a down ballot office, for state and local office, in nonpartisan elections, and in Democratic primaries. And when we say independent, what we're talking about is having a political campaign and infrastructure that is functionally independent from that liberal capitalist faction in the Democratic Party, by being able to raise our own money, by being able to have volunteers and working people power the campaign with door knocking, with phone banking, with volunteering, and to be able to contest elections, with a coalition that is, working class, right? With a base of support that is the working class, and elect people that are going to be responsive to the working class. But we also need to understand that we have this, extremely rigged election system in the United States where people really can't create, new third parties on a whim. Third party voting in the last election was actually lower than it's been in a long time. People are taught from like grade school that you shouldn't vote for a third party because you're going to throw away your vote. And there's been multiple times in history where, and in recent and, long past US history where people have set out to form third parties. And it's a very, very long-term process, not something we can just immediately declare. And so in the long term, we do want to build up a socialist working class party that can win majorities in US elections and carry out a democratic revolution in the United States. But to do that, we need to be thinking about the long game and building up our bench of, elected officials and building up a big mass movement to power that.
Great. Thank you, Nate. Next, I'm going to go to Michael.
Thank you, comrade. It should be clear that the realignment is impossible without the accountability of the Democratic Party. The lack of principles and commitment to capital has left little but a hollow shell that's led to a complete rejection of liberalism by the broad majority of the working class. Socialists should support a break with the Democratic Party and create an independent socialist party and platform. But that party must run, contest, and win elections in order to persuade the class that our party can be the vehicle of the working class to build a real democracy on a path to socialism. It's important to stress that none of this that I've mentioned has anything to do with what a ballot line we use or whether the bourgeois state classifies as a 501c3 or a formal political party in the law courts. What matters is we are asserting our independence. That's why we in MUG generally don't like to talk about the break, because the break isn't an event, it's a process. It happens in a small way every time a chapter builds an independent electoral strategy at any in a bigger way, in a bigger way that when we campaign with DSA and socialists on the literature, and we will know it's in full swing when Democrats find us so intolerable that they throw us out of the Democratic Legislative Caucus. And we will be there when socialists in office caucuses aren't a faction of the Democratic Party, but bleeding ulcers that the Dems are desperately suing us to get off of their ballot line. And that's all I've got. Thank you, comrade.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Next, I'm going to go to Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
Hey, comrades. Appreciate the comments so far. Yes, I think where we're going and where we need to go is an independent working class party of by and for working class people, and that the Democratic Party is not a political party that can just be taken over by the working class. It's ultimately more of a fundraising apparatus for big Democratic campaigns and candidates that doesn't function really, I think has been mentioned already, as a traditional political party in the same ways as in other countries. And so I think where we're going, we need to have independent political power. And a little bit later in this panel, I know we're going to talk about the timeline. So I think that as another comrade just mentioned too, Comrade Mike just mentioned, like it's not just going to be one moment, but it's going to be over different moments. So I agree with that there. What I'll say is I think we need clear politics. Like if DSA is going to be running electoral campaigns, what we need is extremely clear politics, and that means differentiating ourselves from the Democratic Party in every possible moment. And so, I mean, in my particular instance, I'm a candidate in Jersey City's council race, and in this municipal election, it's a nonpartisan race. There is no primary that we have to run through to get to the general election. And so the entire race is an opportunity to distinguish what democratic socialist politics look like from Democratic Party politics. And I think that's really crucial that we should be doing in general election races that we're identifying as strategic races to run, but also if we do identify primary races where we are going to be challenging within the Democratic primary process, what we need to be doing is both rhetorically and structurally putting that independent party politics forward, where we're advocating for working class politics. So I think the direction needs to be either immediately through kind of through nonpartisan races, or in a very, very concerted timeline through primary processes, like looking for how we break in these different steps in different moments. I see I have about a minute left. I'll also just share that I think like when we talk about a third party challenge and an independent working class party, it needs to be very different than extant third parties like the Green Party. We need a political party that does not only run elections. We need a political party that is deeply involved in tenant organizing, labor organizing, organizing for ballot initiatives and referenda between elections of candidates for office. So we need a much more robust sense of what party building is than what extant third parties in the US have been doing. So I know my time is run out. I'm going to stop there. Look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Thank you so much. Next, we are going to move to Genevieve. Go ahead, Genevieve.
Sorry, I was muted. I mean, the question is, should socialists support a break with the Democratic Party or realignment of the Democratic Party? And it seems like everybody so far has said no to both of those things, really, or they'll say like, we should do a break, but also we're still running on primaries to do the break. It's like, I kind of think we all have the same opinion, which is that DSA evolved a strategy that people have not figured out for like 100 years, and we should keep doing it. Like, I think that this like obsession with the Democrats or any major party as like a spiritual entity with like the suborbital soul, instead of just like as these pre-prescribed legal containers that are basically like public utilities for ballot access in this country, is a distraction. We already have a party. It just doesn't have legal recognition. We don't live in a parliamentary democracy. We used to have a multi-party system in this country in the early 20th. That changed in the early 20th century because they changed the laws. In the 30s, in the 60s, in the 70s, they hollowed out the party system, they locked it down, they deregulated campaign finance, and we are now living under one of the most weird and restrictive election systems in the world. And, for a long time, the socialist strategy was to like plug our ears and be like, la, 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 we're ignoring the legal system or complaining about it from the sidelines. And that changed in 2016 with DSA. And we've started running in primaries. We're saying, okay, this is the legal hand we've been dealt. We're going to run however we need to run to win office in this country and to say, hey, we're running on these principles to protect your housing, to guarantee you health care, to, restructure society and redistribute wealth and power for the working class. The election's on this day. Go vote for us. That's what we're doing now. And it seems like everybody wants that to keep going, but just has sort of like different buzzwords to talk about it. The reality is that now we have a party. What we're doing is working. We have elected hundreds of legislators. We're the largest socialist organization in 100 years. We're a household name in cities all over the country in a way we weren't even 4 years ago. We're passing laws, we're changing lives. In places like New York, we've developed systems for co-governing with the people we've elected. In New York, we're 2 elected officials away from the largest socialist delegation at a state level in the history of this country. What we're doing is writing history right now. Like our grandkids are going to read about this in the history of our tradition. And the actual question here is, what's our next chapter? Like, everybody's going to talk about this in the same way, but like, look at what people are prescribing for actual like day-to-day directions in the organization. Are we going to repeat the history of the Socialist Party 100 years ago, where they had all this momentum, they elected all these people, and then they started expelling them one by one over disagreements over votes or, relationships to other parties, and they turned inward. They like collapsed over their position on like, what statement are we going to make on World War I? Like, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to obsess over our relationship to the Democrats instead of obsess over our relationship to changing the world. And I don't think socialists should let that happen.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. All right. Next we're going to have Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I appreciate that lead in because I think it establishes things pretty well. I do agree that everybody so far has said something kind of similar, which amounts to, well, yes, we need to develop a distinct independent socialist line, but no, that's not really about the break from the Democrats and so on. I'm going to say, actually, yeah, it is about the break from the Democrats. And should we have our own party? Yes, we should break from the Democratic Party. I'll explain more what that means. It doesn't just mean jumping to immediately become the Green Party, but I think, especially for an internal discussion like this, we should start from the understanding. Yes. Why? Well, I think what Genevieve just said actually kind of points to the importance of this. The question, for example, of how socialists should vote about World War I and what statements they should make is pretty dang important, not just historically, but it matters because what happened immediately after World War I, the Palmer raids, the first Red Scares, the deliberate destruction of the Socialist Party. And I think what we need to keep in mind is that, well, yes, we have gained substantial things in the Democratic Party, and we should not throw all of those away right away. There is not a coherent future for socialists within the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party is a lot more than just a ballot line. The Democratic Party is a coherent social institution, albeit a nebulous one. It unifies things like fundraising networks, social and media apparatuses, community support, local and national voter mobilization networks, political machine, policy networks, and apparatuses. It's staffed and filled with tens of thousands of bureaucrats, both in and out of government across the country. It has ties to all sorts of major industries, and it functions as a coherent political brand. People know what it means to be a Democrat. And when we say we're running as a Democrat and advocating Democratic Party policies, that means something. It means that we're relevant, and it means we're tied to something people think can actually win. But it also means that we are connected to this political institution that people strongly associate with the 2 major parties that are abandoning them and failing them. And so our job is to win over the working class to a different position. I wanted to disagree a little bit with something I think Michael said, which was he said that the working class is already beginning to give up on liberalism. I don't actually think that's the case. Well, maybe they're beginning to, but the vast majority of workers either agree with the Republican Party or agree with the Democratic Party. We shouldn't have illusions about this at all. If we want to build a socialist party, we have to start from the recognition that our politics are not wildly popular, and our advocacy and our organizing and our our work in the Trump era has to be designed to catalyze this moment where people have seen the Democratic Party fail, but are not yet aware what a clear alternative would look like, and to try to provide that alternative to them. So if the Democratic Party is more than a ballot line, but a social institution that operates as a force in society that presents a narrative that people point towards as a way to change or impact their lives, the only way for socialists to build up our own party is to try to operate as our own coherent social institution. And that means we'll have to match them blow for blow on all of these levels of organizing and building social structures.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Next, I'm going to go to Jesse. Go ahead, Jesse.
Hi. So I guess as Libertarian Socialist Caucus, in a weird way, we end up as moderates on this because we agree with some of the critiques of making a third party that, yeah, people aren't really voting for third party. And I've seen myself that trying to realign the Democratic Party is a waste of time. What happened in Nevada is Democrats actually, the Socialists actually won the chairmanship of the Nevada State Democratic Party. The Dems there just shut it down and completely moved hundreds of thousands of dollars to non-socialists. Like, they will burn their party to the ground before they give it over to you. But when it comes to breaking with the Democratic Party, yeah, we should break from the Democratic Party, but we should break so completely with the Democratic Party that we disagree with them about what politics even is. I think the closest to our position that's been articulated so far is about a party that will do tenant organizing, that will do labor organizing. This is what we should do. We should change people's ideas of what politics is beyond just going to the polls and voting every 2 years, every 4 years. There is nothing that we can do in terms of elections that is going to change the fact that Trump is the president right now. There is nothing we can do in terms of voting that is going to change the fact that the Democratic Party started a genocide in Palestine. We have to find other ways to be active politically in order to change that. We have to do mutual aid. We have to do other things. Complete break from the idea of the Democratic Party vision of what politics means.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. All right. Thank you, everyone, for our first question. So now we're going to move on to the second question. So I'm going to paste that in the chat, and I'm going to read it out. What is your timeline for building/taking over a party? What are the benchmarks for success that you want to achieve by 2026, 2028, etc.? And for this, I'm going to go to Michael first. So go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, comrade. So for the reasons I mentioned in my last answer, I don't think it makes sense to ask for a date. So the question is, what is your timeline for taking over a party? What are the benchmarks for success you want to achieve by 2026? So I don't think it makes sense to ask for a date. I think we could run as Greens if we want to, but what difference does that make if we're still just bouncing off the Democrats' program? We should seek an immediate strategy of programmatic unity through the standardization of our platform boundaries. Closing ranks with our electeds to set a standard for discipline and recallability, communication, and feedback should create a level of accountability in our electoral work. For a chapter communication and feedback from our national commissions and committees, cadres within them should be dedicated to chapter outreach and communication to be able to enable broad adoption of our party platform demands. This must become an immediate task of our organization in order to establish a base for a national framework. So I do want to respond to Sarah's point a little that most of the working class doesn't agree with us. They agree with the Democrats or the Republicans. The first part is true. We are a minority movement, but with all due respect, to the second part, that people agree with the Democrats or the Republicans is obviously not for the simplest reason that most workers just do not vote. They don't vote, so they don't agree with liberalism. I think that's the end of this one. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Next, we're going to go to Jesse. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, so similarly, I kind of have to reject some of the framing of the question because I don't think we should be building or taking over a party. So how I would measure or set benchmarks instead, I don't want to make up some specific numbers because I'm not the boss of socialism, but how I would start measuring things is in a few ways. I think we should measure the number of labor campaigns across the country that we're intentionally putting salts in, that we are cultivating a movement to continue the trend of the labor movement to the left. So I would measure the number of campaigns where DSA members are involved in organizing new workplaces, the number of key industries that DSA members are intentionally getting jobs in order to be part of those unions and shift those unions to the left. Similarly, we should look at the number of chapters or neighborhoods that are organized in a systematic enough way that they have the power to physically stop deportations. So if there is one city in the United States that DSA members can be there and ICE comes and DSA members can stop that from happening, that is one thing we can do. It should be copied all across the country because, again, we can't elect ICE out of office. That is just going to be there for the next 4 years. We need to have measurements about how good we are at stopping that. And then thirdly, most broadly, just the number of places that we're setting up mutual aid networks. I think it's not a surprise, anyone that comes to Seattle, like there is still a homelessness crisis, a poverty crisis in lots of areas, even in rural areas. There are a lot of poor people that Democrats and Republicans just assume don't exist. We've done really good stuff in Seattle, raising money for hurricane relief in North Carolina and in that area. We need to continue that kind of model where DSA chapters all across the country are building up mutual aid networks, not just to respond to crises, but proactively to help one another. And that people understand that these mutual aid networks, it's not just going and getting food, that they are part of a political movement when they are helping one another with this sort of thing. So that's the three things that I would measure our success on: our labor activism, number of chapters that we're stopping deportations in, and the number of cities where we have a mutual aid network.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Next, we are going to go to Nate. Go ahead.
So it was stated earlier that a majority of working class people don't vote. That's false. Most people do vote. It was about a third of voters didn't vote in the presidential election. About 2/3 did vote for either the Democrats or Republicans. The majority of people do participate in politics through elections, so we need to meet them where they're at, and we need to campaign in elections in order to actually advocate for our politics, win people's support. Looking forward, I think going into the 2026 and 2028 elections, there's a lot of municipals, a lot of nonpartisan elections, a lot of local down ballot primaries that people can be running in. Our chapter, we're looking at running somebody for city council and nonpartisan elections next year. I think every chapter in the country should really be mapping out what are the local and state elections coming up 2025, 2026, right? I think the biggest thing that DSA is doing in the country right now is running Zohran Mamdani for New York City mayor. And then second is Jake's campaign, which is also really cool. But I think Zohran is running in a Democratic primary that's coming up like in the next 6 months, right? But people view him not as a Democrat. People view him extremely oppositionally to Eric Adams, the mayor, right? And Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, is openly talking about switching parties to the Republican Party. We're in a time where people are switching teams all the time. People really have malleable politics right now. And so I think this is our opportunity to actually break the two-party system by continuing to drive in the wedge of what has been working, which is putting forward independent candidates with their own independent political base, with our socialist politics in Democratic primaries in many places where we can peel off a lot of people that are amenable to our politics. And so another essential thing is that Rashida Tlaib is going to be up for re-election. AIPAC is going to field a candidate against her. Right? She is our one remaining congressional DSA member in office. I'm not happy that that's where we're at right now for many reasons people can probably surmise, but we've got one left thanks to the current NPC. And so we need to do everything in our power to keep her in office, because Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush losing was a massive defeat politically for the Palestine movement. And in order to keep fighting for a free Palestine, we need to make sure that Rashida is reelected in 2026. Then in 2028, we need to support the UAW's call for a general strike on May 1st, 2028, and do everything we can to support the labor movement in aligning contracts around a massive national mobilization on May 1st, which will coincide with the Democratic primaries happening in 2028, when there is no clear successor to the mantle of the Democratic Party. And that's why we should also run a socialist labor candidate for office of the President of the United States in 2028, because when we ran Bernie both times, it was the greatest innovation of the socialist movement in 50 years. It was the thing that grew socialists' popularity, the thing that communicated socialism to the most people. It was the most powerful political intervention in US politics that socialists have done in recent history. And the second after that was uncommitted, when we didn't even have a candidate. I wish we had a candidate. So I think the lesson from this presidential year is we need a candidate in the 2028 Democratic primaries for president.
Great. Thank you, Nate. All right. Next, we're going to go to Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. I think this conversation has been really interesting so far. I agree with an important part of what Nate just said, which is I really, really want to stress this idea that we need to actually proactively win a lot of people over. The base for a mass socialist party does not presently exist. But here's where I'm going to disagree. I think the idea that what we've been doing has basically been working and it's just the current NPC who messed up and oops, we lost all of these people seems to me to be a kind of dead-end strategy. I think if our goal is just to elect the next handful of socialists, repeating basically the approach we've been doing is a good one. And I don't mean to just dismiss that. It's really important to elect people and get our next wins on the table. But we need to also be thinking about what are we coherently building for in the long term, and what are we doing with this significant opportunity where all of these people are changing their opinion. So I think there's a lot we can do, but I don't think we can kind of just say oh, setting clear expectations doesn't work. Actually, we are the boss of socialism, or at least DSA. It's a member-run organization, and if we don't propose clear proposals, platforms, outlines, and strategies for 2025 convention, those things aren't going to exist. So some stuff I think we can be doing. First of all, I think the NPC can commit to the idea that we are party building and start messaging everywhere, relentlessly attacking the Democratic Party while being clear that Donald Trump is also a central threat. I think that our elected officials up and down the line should be refusing to comply with illegal and immoral Trump administration policy and trying to take the leadership of the resistance to Trump. I think that in 2026, we should run a slate both as Democrats and where possible as independents on a clear shared program. I think we should create a plan and task our staff and the NEC with helping chapters in major urban centers with nonpartisan elections begin developing municipal socialist parties, something we're already trying to work on in Portland. And I also think we should deliberately target seats that are deep red, think Dan Osborne, or deep blue, like where Sharma ran against Frank Chop way back in 2012, where we can run as independents and challenge the major parties, and also places that had high third-party votes in the past election. Finally, I do think we should be looking to build a new party. I think that if we run a strong campaign in 2026 and through the whole year we work on building up this social institution, the narrative, political education, labor solidarity, media, news, and political platforms, and a coherent countercultural force against Trump, and use strong comms, coordinated interventions in mass protests, and a unified strategic message around a clear program, we can prepare for, in 2027, launching a party that combines variously fusion tickets, distinct local ballot lines, independent campaigns, and yes, where necessary, Democrats. But it must have a unified internal structure, and it has to have more than a shared line. It has to be a coherent electoral vehicle that's united around a party-like program. And I think we can launch something like that in 2027.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Next, I'm going to go to Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
Hey, thanks, folks. Yeah, really great discussion here. I want to say just a couple of things that have come up about the majority of people voting for the two major parties or not. I think, clearly we see a majority of people end up voting in the general election, even if it's not a great majority of people. But that being said, a tiny minority of people vote in the Democratic Party, and we should take that seriously, that the Democratic party primary, excuse me, is a really, really limited vehicle for reaching the masses of working people. And we shouldn't just brush that aside when we think about making interventions in the Democratic primary process. As we start building up this timeline and identifying in 2025, 6, 7, and 8, which kind of elections we want to run in. In addition, we should recognize and appreciate Sarah's comment there. The NPC, it isn't just like the sole person, the sole entity to blame for things that have gone down with some of our national level electeds. Like we have lost, quote unquote, Bowman or AOC for various reasons, including they do not see themselves primarily as democratic socialists and part of democratic socialist organization. They do not see themselves beholden to or accountable to democratic socialist organization. And that's not just like a knock at them as individuals. That's a critique of the level of socialist organization that we're at right now. And I think just like running to win more of those same kinds of seats, it's not necessarily the answer by itself, or it's not the answer by itself. So that's something that shouldn't be repeated, where we're putting energy in the next 4 years throughout the Trump presidency into just getting as many seats as possible. We need people who see themselves as democratic socialists, accountable to organization and the independent party that we're building. And so, yeah, I agree with what folks are saying, especially local level and some state level races throughout the country. We should be identifying like where the nonpartisan races, where are very strategic races that we would run in the Democratic primary with a kind of view to, okay, 2-3 years out from running in that Democratic primary, how are we moving away from a base of those Democratic primary voters to then having in the next couple of years a base beyond those Democratic primary voters that we're now turning into the base of the independent party we're building. And agree completely with aiming for an independent party supporting mass strike, something maybe probably short of a general strike, but a mass strike in 2028 that's aligning with a left Labor candidate in the 2028 presidential election. But also throughout that, having like DSA be taking a lead on this, like with national co-chairs who are stumping constantly in the media around what is democratic socialism and why is it different from what the Democratic Party is doing, and why do we need to distinguish our politics from the politics of a Democratic Party that is losing its working class base every day.
Great. Thanks, Jake. Last on this question, but not least, of course, is Genevieve. Go ahead, Genevieve.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like it's, in DSA, it seems like we're not even totally on the same page about what a political party even is. Like we'll say, oh, a political party should be organizing union. That's not a political party. That is a labor union. And yeah, DSA members, we should be supporting and doing that. But a political party is an organized attempt to get control of the government. It elects people. It passes laws. We need to be doing that. Like, I think there's this tendency to say, oh, well, there's bad people in the government. That means the government is for bad people and that's their territory. And we're just going to go off and do whatever else. And we're going to do mutual aid and we're going to organize unions. We should be doing all those things, but we should also take control of the state. Like, we are the majority of people in the country, the working class. We make all of this. We should have control of those resources and use the government to do it. And so as far as a timeline for building or taking over a party, again, I think we're already building a party. I think that we have one and that it just doesn't have legal recognition, and that getting that legal recognition is going to take changing laws, right? But like, I think that we should keep building what's working. And I agree with Nate that like in the immediate future, running a presidential candidate in 2028 is top of mind for me. And doing that alongside the UAW's general strike. I think also by 2028, I would like to have 2 more elected officials at the state level in New York and have the largest socialist state legislative delegation in the history of the United States of America. I would also, in the nearer term, like to create state level entities for DSA from above, not incorporated with a bunch of different rules in every single state. I would like to have state level infrastructure around the country that we can use to coordinate our strategy to contest state level elections and coordinate our legislative work at the state levels. I want to beef up that like political party infrastructure by 2028. But I also think that the answer to this is not entirely like how many people are we going to run? What structures are we going to create? Are we going to run someone for president? It's also in the next even 2 years, I want to get through a huge block that we have psychologically as a movement about like whether this is worth even trying to do or whether we should give up. Like it's, you know, you'll even hear it in this room. People being like, they'll say in theory what we should elect, who should we elect, how we should do it. And then we elect these people. And then it's like all of these, people that we send into office or that are leaders or whatever are sellouts and traitors, and they're not doing the things that we want because they're actually bad people who tricked us. We need to get the hell over that. Like, we need to recognize that people are doing their best and they're working within the constraints of a system, because if we keep just like not protecting people, if we keep not voting like to work to protect the people that we already have in office or vote to unendorse them, we're gonna keep losing. If we're gonna build, we have to like commit to the bravery that it takes to continue the momentum, even when things get hard and unsure and we're in unsure territory.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. All right. We're moving on to our next question. So here we go. Pasting it in the chat. Thank you, everyone. All right. How should socialists respond to the election of Donald Trump? What should our strategy be to oppose his right-wing policies? Very important question. So first for this, I'm going to go to Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, comrade. So I do want to distinguish two questions here, strategy and tactics. Framing our response to the upcoming regime of chaotic capital should not change our strategy. We've always had a strategy to fight the framework this country developed from. Our strategy is to win a working class majority, to organize and fight for the tasks that we face. In the United States, our primary task is to fight for a democratic republic and establish a democratic constitution that secures working class rule through which we can do our part to end U.S. imperialism and begin socialist transition. This is especially important as Republicans rely on undemocratic institutions that have been set up over the last 100 years. When we're talking about tactics, I look at my chapter right now, or DSA as a whole right now. I see a need to further clarify our opposition to the Democrats, but I also see a lot of work I think is moving us in that direction. We need to use elections to get the working class to see a different political vision that motivates organization on the ground against the repressive forces behind Trump, the incredibly undemocratic forces behind them, which people already see as a barricade to their voice being heard or their political will being established. The Democrats won't do this. They just look at Biden and Harris campaigns as these kind of siloed, kind of just mass movements of special interest groups coalesced under a label called the Democrats. We can look at a lot of the success of our wage campaigns that associate the material conditions of the working class and a political vessel and a body that involves them, not as a volunteer pool, but as a primary mechanism for action. In our chapters, we occasionally give a training called Building a Mass Org. I'm sure plenty of you have seen it, plenty of you have given it. It's pretty good. It's great training. It talks about massive politically organizing, getting everybody involved with this. Putting that position to task by involving the working class in our organizing to give them agency over their own lives should be our task. That is our part. All of our tactics revolve around that, is organizing the working class. And only through the organization of the working class as an independent and mass organizing party can any meaningful change occur at all in our society. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Next, we're going to have Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
Thanks. Yeah, I think in the immediate aftermath that we're seeing, one of the most important things is to resist pressure for Democratic Party unity. There's going to be a lot of pressure to consolidate the left and progressives and socialists and liberals around the Democratic Party to resist Trump and the increasingly fascist Republican Party. And we need to stake out our distinct politics among that. And I think one of those ways could be to comment on New York, if I may, from New Jersey, to say that Zoran should run in the independent, in the general, as an independent as well. So if Zoran loses the primary, it would be so exciting to see him run against an Eric Adams nominated by the Democrats, or maybe a more liberal Democratic nominee in the primary there, and say that this is what democratic socialist politics looks like. This is what real resistance to fascist politics and proto-fascist politics celebrated by Trump looks like. In addition, I think some campaigns that I'm really excited about are a Votes for All campaign that I think chapters across the country are experimenting with. And in Jersey, we're experimenting with winning voting rights for non-citizens in municipal elections and getting that on the ballot so that we can enfranchise thousands and thousands and thousands more people just in places like Jersey City alone and bring so many more people into the democratic process and fight back against really fascistic anti-immigrant rhetoric with actually empowering in a material way more of our immigrant communities to participate in the democratic process. Other kinds of ballot referenda to just, again, fight back against the Republican Party's ascension of just more and more these capitalists to greater and greater positions in the cabinet, with rent control ballot referenda and things like this is what I'm really excited about at the local level. So those are some of the ideas, but I think the main thing is like how do we resist and stake out ourselves over and against a Democratic Party unity that we're going to feel a ton of pressure to bow down into, especially when we participate in elections that put us on the Democratic ballot line.
Great. Thank you, Jake. All right. Next, we are going to go to Genevieve.
I think that in response to Donald Trump, like the scary thing is that like, you know, people say like, oh, go build just local stuff, like do mutual aid, create communities of care. Like, yes, we should do these things. On an interpersonal level, this is the like only way to stay sane. But the reality is the far right has taken power in this country. They got it. We are not going to be able to resist this by like changing what we believe or changing how we relate to each other in the immediate future. And so to me, the response to the election of Donald Trump needs to be getting really real about why and how the far right seized power in this country. And really, it was not like this did not start in 2016. This started about 50 years ago when the right responded to the gains of the left during the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and saw how we were using societal infrastructure like the media and universities and, yeah, the democratic system through like the Civil Rights Act and so on to change society, to shape it in the image we wanted to shape it. And they responded to that. And they realized something that we still have not accepted, which is that like you got to use whatever you can to take power in this country. They have built their like House Freedom Caucus as like basically just like an unrecognized party. And they have seized control of the government. They took the judicial system. They created media institutions. They did all of this. And so like, I think that we need to buckle down for the long game and demonstrate, you know, people are like, we need to do ballot referendums. We need to elect these people. Like, yes, it's to do the things that those things have the power to do, but it's also to demonstrate that majority constituencies in these places support these policies and can support democratic socialism. Because when Donald Trump has won, he spent hundreds of millions on anti-trans ads, all this stuff. What that's showing, both Republicans and Democrats, is that you can win elections by running on these things. And so all these people who are careerists who just want to like ascend in their positions are going to respond to that by tacking right. And so we need to take the things that we know a majority of people support, like more workers' rights, higher minimum wages, universal health care, all of this stuff, trans rights even, and win elections and ballot referendums with that to show that functional, like coherable majorities support these things. And that if you want a political career in this country, you need to pay attention not just to those demands, but to the organized infrastructure that's delivering them, which I think that should be DSA.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. Next, we're going to go to Jesse. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a disconnect between the threat that we're facing of the Trump administration being in power and the tactics and strategies that y'all are talking about in terms of running elections. Like, an election is not going to stop ICE. It just isn't. You can't vote against ICE at this point. Specifically about like stopping careerist politicians, there's a contradiction there where we want the careerist politicians to embrace social democratic policies, because we'll vote them out otherwise. Okay, if we do that, then we have to discipline those electeds once they get into office. You can't have it both ways. But specifically, what we need to do, I think that even social democrats, even liberals, I mean this very seriously, 4 years we need to spend organizing like we're all anarchists, because elections are not going to stop these things. We have to help our neighbors directly. Yes, the far right has taken power. That means that elections aren't going to get them out of it. And we're not just talking about talking to neighbors to make a new friend, talking about talking to neighbors to stop them from getting deported. Like, those are very, very different things. So if you believe that Trump really is a fascist, that he's creating a fascist administrative state, what would you do if you are in a fascist dictatorship to organize against that? Are you just going to do ballot referenda and have local candidates for office? You have to think bigger than that. I've worked in national democratic politics. It is so much fucking work. I worked 70 hours a week for 6 months straight just for the Democratic Party. That is so much work, so many resources that need to be put toward things that can more directly help people. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Next, we're going to go to Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I gotta say that got a chuckle out of me, Jesse. I think y'all should organize like Trotskyists. Let me try and sell you on it. So, I think that there's a little bit of a contradiction here, saying that what we've been doing is working, but it's also facilitating the internal rending of our organization, where people don't see clear steps towards a socialist horizon, and so they're seeking to discipline our elected officials. And I don't think that's just happening because they haven't got it through their heads that we need to be tough and make compromises. I think people are trying to resolve this contradiction between engaging in mass action and putting forward coherent socialist politics in a way that builds our movement. And I think there are two ways to do this most effectively. The first is trying to employ the tactics of the united front. That is to say, building broad coalitions while simultaneously keeping our clear political line. And the second is trying to employ the transitional method. That is to say, putting forward tactics and analysis, but also programmatic positions that connect to immediate demands, but then move forward to point towards our horizon of a rupture with capitalism. So when we're talking with people, we have to be talking about how we're going to change their lives. This is all the more important right now because as socialists, we are trying to facilitate a credible opposition. So we need to genuinely be in opposition, not just to the Republicans, but also the Democrats who keep losing and letting the Republicans win. But at the same time, we need to make sure it's actually convincing to people, because people are voting on the basis of trying to protect their lives, even as they don't really trust that the Democrats will do it, because they feel like there's not another option. So what are some steps we can take in the immediate term, apart from building up these party-like structures through propaganda and a program that unifies our work? Non-compliance and mass protest are the means by which we can immediately fight against the Trump administration. Trying to set out standards that our elected officials are going to block Donald Trump up and down the line, cause every problem they can for implementing his policies. But we're also going to need to be more militant than just working within city council or state government. We're going to need to coordinate strikes and civil disobedience, and we're going to need to kind of push the boundaries of things. Like, not to be scary, but we might need leaders to be willing to risk getting arrested sometimes to oppose these policies. By taking the initiative to build popular labor left coalitions and distinguishing ourselves as the clear leaders and putting forward our socialist vision, I believe that we can convince those masses of people we want to convince of our socialist politics and bring them in to be the base of the party-like structure I then think we can try to build by 2027.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, our last panelist on this question is Nate.
Yeah, so there's millions of people out there that are really, really pissed off about Donald Trump being elected. And there are millions and millions of them identify as socialists and identify as leftists and want to get organized. And people are coming into DSA meetings and other organizations in large numbers. People want to get involved in like organizing. People want to oppose the Trump agenda as he's coming into office, right? So I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do in terms of trying to, get local governments and state governments to try to pass laws to resist whatever Trump wants to do via executive order. I do think there's a lot of merit to doing a lot of community organizing to build up that's civil society resilience against things that the administration is doing, like neighborhood organizing, like labor organizing, right? I think that there's a lot of different interventions we can make, but I think it's also really important to understand that there's a much broader mass movement against Trump than just DSA's membership, right? DSA is swimming in a very large ocean with a lot of other organizations and a lot of disorganized people, right? And there was an earlier comment that DSA is the boss of socialism. That's just not true, right? This is substitutionism. It's thinking that, we, the party, we know best, right? But we're a very, very small fraction of the left, and we need to recognize that we're operating with a lot of other leftists and a lot of other socialists, a lot of people that are not DSA members, right? And we want to be a political vehicle for them. And so that means we need to actually say that Donald Trump is bad. When people hear DSA members, some minority DSA members say there's no difference between the Democrats and Republicans. Trump is just as bad as Kamala. When they're really, really pissed off about Trump doing all these horrific things, they're going to think we're fucking stupid and they're not going to want to join, right? That kind of messaging is repellent to working people. And so I think it's extremely important that we talk about the truth, about the dangers that are coming, and that we be willing to criticize the Republican Party, that we be willing to criticize Trump and actually stand against him in a way that many in DSA have been unwilling to do.
Great. Thank you, Nate. All right. So now we're moving on to our next question. So what lessons did we learn from the last 4 years? Specifically, what have the previous 2 NPC terms, our work under Biden, and our election strategy in 2024 demonstrated about DSA and the Democratic Party? Very important question. Our first panelist here is going to be Genevieve. Go ahead, Genevieve.
I think the biggest thing that we've learned over the last 4 years, as DSA, is that there is no simple trick that is just going to give us infinite growth to build a socialist party that's going to take over the country. We had this big momentum in 2016 and through the Trump campaign, really, and through 2020. And it wasn't forever. It turns out that we need to buckle down for the long haul and be willing to try everything. People are talking about mutual aid, labor unions. I have organized labor unions. I quit my politics job to go and organize tenant unions because I really believe that we need to expand more and try everything and be willing to do more of these things, and particularly not shut down the work that other people are trying to do to build the movement in the way that they want to build it, because this is a long haul fight. We've also learned from, electing a more sectarian NPC this time that wants DSA to be more like the older vanguardist organizations and expel its electeds and have more of an inward focus, that's also not the magic bullet that people promised it was going to be. That unendorsing AOC didn't awaken the sleeping masses and pull them into DSA. We know that doesn't work either. And so for me, over the past, and also we saw that while there's a difference to having Democrats in office, particularly in the world of labor, the reason Starbucks Workers United took off and didn't under the Trump administration was because under the Trump NLRB, they ruled that you couldn't do elections store by store. You had to go regional. And then under the Biden NLRB, they allowed store by store elections, and that allowed Starbucks Workers United to become what it is. While there's some small difference here, or there on some issues, and we can use that strategically to build what we're building, the Democrats still have this fundamental contradictions of they want the working class's votes and they want the ruling class's money. That is not a recipe to actually do any transformative change for the working class. So we need to continue to build our own thing in the way that we're building our own thing. And for me, from working directly with socialist electeds that I have run and elected both at the local level and the state level over the past several years, I have seen people make the bad votes. I know that they'd make those votes that have disagreed or been, not what we would want them to do or whatever, not because they're bad deceivers who go in there to fuck us over. It's because elected officials, they're people just like us. And we are really new and really small. We haven't figured a lot of this out. And a lot of the times when people vote in a way we don't like, it's not because they're secretly a bad person. It's because elected officials behave. This is the thing, is that the path to accountability is not the personal moral convictions of the people that we elect to office. Not that that's unimportant, but elected officials listen to whoever has the power to control the results of an election. And if we want elected officials to piss off established powers more and work more with us. Like, we need to more demonstrably and reliably control election results. And like, I want to keep building that and keep doing it. And it concerns me that people are like, oh, this hasn't like taken over the country yet, so we want to abandon this strategy. And yeah, we want to organize unions and tenant unions and whatever, but we also want to stop the people who are building this party project from building that party project. And once we purge the undesirable element, suddenly the masses will flow in. I think that's totally wrong. And I think it's like leaning more towards Trumpism than towards anything that we want to build.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. Next is Michael.
Yeah, thanks. So some lessons we learned in the last couple of years is that we can't wrest reforms like Medicare for all through phone banks, legislative training, and pressure tactics alone. We need to use elections to put forward DSA as a political alternative to motivate the organization of working class movements, turn it into a real threat led by DSA that forces Democrats to concede these reforms off the threat of electing more socialists that force the capitalists to abandon their own fake, sham, false democracy. The capitalist class, they have their financial and institutional pressures. The working class brings pressure through organization. That's our tool. That's our weapon. Pushing back against Genevieve, socialists supporting national efforts in World War I wasn't just a small thing. It was a capitulation of this power. Through developing DSA as an explicit oppositional alternative in this vein, workers can see the interests of the capitalists, of the fake people who claim about democracy, the bureaucrats. You can see this interest of them, and you can build in the idea that democracy is something we must fight for. That what it means to be democratic is not just having a vote. It doesn't mean just casting your vote to these bureaucrats who act as unaccountable, unrepresentative, people. So only through the organization of the working class into a democratic worker republic can our will of an actual socialist society be won. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Next, I'm going to go to Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
Thanks, comrades. Yeah, I think these are all important lessons. I think one is just that also the Democratic Party is losing its working class base. I mean, we are seeing de-alignment in front of our eyes. We're seeing the base of Democratic Party voters shift more and more to more and more highly educated and more wealthy voters. And I think we have to take that seriously. Again, when we make decisions about in the next 4 years during the Trump presidency about are we going to run in Democratic primary elections, and that's just not, we shouldn't be agnostic about that. We should be really intentional about those. And we should be selective about our campaigns. I agree with Comrade Genevieve saying like electeds are going to be beholden to who they see power in, right? And so we need to be working with candidates and only being really selective about endorsing candidates who are deeply, deeply committed to building democratic socialist organization, first and foremost, because they see themselves as parts of this organization. I really agree that it's not a matter, or the main concern is not about their personality and their character. It's about what the structures of power are and what the balance of class forces is. So we should be really selective about choosing candidates and choosing campaigns that are going to help build up the organization to change the balance of class forces. And I think in terms of tactics, to go a little bit under the level of strategy here, door knocking maybe isn't the only tactic or even the primary tactic that we should be relying on for our electoral work. I mean, certainly a lot of other tactics in terms of like mass mobilization, demonstration, in the streets, protests, like all these are important, and it's kind of militant work is very important, as Comrade Jesse and Comrade Sarah were mentioning. But this being an electoral forum here, I want to focus on the electoral tactics. I think door knocking should be still one among many tactics that we use, but I think we should have more collective experiences, especially for the huge wave of new members that DSA is getting in this kind of post-Trump election bump that we're seeing right now. Door knocking can be really intimidating for people. So what are other kinds of collective experiences where people are going out on street corners in kind of mass groups and spreading propaganda around? What are some other things that people can do to engage in electoral strategies, learning from other countries like Brazil, to be able to do so? And, lastly, it's saying what I think everyone is thinking here too, that an electoral party is nothing, an independent party is nothing, the party that we need is nothing without a really strong labor movement. And also I think tenants movement needs to be built as well. So like having really strong labor and tenants movement is going to be key, which means not only pouring resources into electoral work, but continuing to pour resources into the labor movement work and the tenant movement work that our DSA comrades are doing in order to make sure that we have a base for our electoral party too.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Next, we are going to go to Nate.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things that have worked really well over the past 4 years. I think to speak on our campaign in Atlanta DSA, we had a candidate, Gabriel Sanchez. He was on our electoral committee with me for many years. He was on the steering committee with me a few years ago. He resigned from steering committee to run for state house, right? And so we found a candidate that was somebody who was strongly aligned with our movement, that came up in our movement, in our organization, that had a high level of trust and a deep relationships with everybody in our chapter. And we ran him for state house. We had a lot of buy-in. And now that he's in office, he's going to be voting with us on everything, right? He's going to be, working hand in glove with DSA and other left progressive organizations, not just DSA. But, we have a really good relationship, and we're not going to run into these problems that other chapters run into when there's a lot of chapters that issue paper endorsements of people that they have no ability to hold accountable. And that's something that, other chapters need to stop doing. In Atlanta DSA, we have a policy where we only endorse candidates that support BDS. We only support DSA members. We only support people that agree with our platform, that are going to let DSA play a huge role in their campaign. And so I think it's really important that we be strategic about our interventions, and then we don't just talk the talk. We can't just be issuing statements about Palestine, about labor conflicts, about whatever's in the news, because we talked a lot of smack about Palestine, right? And then we endorsed Cori Bush for office, and we did basically nothing, right? I was working on the NEC. I helped organize us to make 300,000 phone calls in support of Cori Bush's campaign, got all the help from St. Louis DSA and a couple of volunteers, very little support from the NEC, very little support from the NPC, very little staff support. We do not have a national office or infrastructure that is functional, and we talk all sorts of smack and we make all sorts of grandiose statements, but the actual power of the national organization to intervene in federal elections and to follow through on these things is not really there, right? And so how are people going to react, right? How are other Congress people or other electeds going to react when we issue these grandiose statements, but then we don't back it up? And so I think it's really important that we focus on building actual concrete power and substance rather than talking about, statements. And I think that's, just writ large, there's a lot of self-importance. And I think a lot of people think that DSA, is the thing, and because a lot of us, frankly, did come up in DSA. It's the first organization many of us on this call were probably really deeply involved with, right? But there is this much broader movement. And so I think we have to have a realistic perspective on what can we actually do? And so we need to actually follow through on what we're going to do. And so that means we need to focus on running these down ballot candidates and stop all the inward facing factionalism. It's really, really alienating to new members. New members come in, they really don't like it. New members care about running people up for office. People care about labor unions. People care about mutual aid. People care about our programming, right? And so we need to put on a good face for people coming in. Because just to be frank, last thing is that the huge bump we're seeing, this is less than a tenth of what we saw in 2016, 2020. And it's because the NPC laid off all the comm staff, had statements that were completely tone deaf, had really bad messaging strategy that didn't meet people where they were at. And so we're not being able to recruit nearly as many people as we could.
Great. Thank you, Nate. Next, we're going to have Jesse.
So what we learned from the last 4 years, personally, I see it as, even as someone that worked for the Democratic Party, my God, they just suck at this. Even on their own terms, they're just so bad at doing the winning elections. That is the whole reason for them existing. And as far as DSA and the Democratic Party, I think what we've seen is that even though, yes, we've elected more socialists than have ever been in State House of New York, for example, but even with those victories, just elected officials by themselves are not enough to have the policy effects that we want. There's a difference between victory in terms of we have X number of people that are elected and their ability to actually enact change. So far, the Biden administration on foreign policy issues like Palestine has been as bad as we can expect, and socialists, including DSA, have had no ability to affect that whatsoever. And I think we need to be realistic about that. While at the same time, of course, yeah, the fascists are a lot worse. I had my job reinstated by the National Labor Relations Board. So you're not going to hear me saying that like Biden's administration is exactly the same as the Republicans. And of course, we fight Trump more than we fight the Democratic Party. But I think what we've seen in the last 4 years are the limits of what small numbers of socialist elected officials can do, and how many resources it takes just to keep them in office. Every time we elect a DSA elected, it's not just the resources to get them in office. We have to spend more resources every 2 years just to keep them in office, and we haven't had the ability to do that. And so I think that this should tell us like the commitment that doing this amount of electoralism takes as DSA. It's very easy to say, oh, we can do mutual aid and labor unions and tenant unions and elections. Well, like if you have a pie chart, like what percentage do you want to see with elections? Because currently in DSA, it's something like 90%, I would estimate off the top of my head, in terms of our resources that we're spending just on elections. And we should think about our priorities in terms of what we're doing.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. All right. And last on this question, we have Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot from this term, but one thing I do really want to push back on is the idea that there's one side that's been pushing a sectarian, marginalizing approach, and that the other side has their hands completely clean. I mean, come on, guys. Like, I think we all heard what we said in the statements, which is that we're pretty frustrated with each other and with good reason. Our political base, the base of the Bernie movement, has been split by the development of conditions over the last 4 years. I think that we learned two big lessons from the Trump administration. I think we learned one from 2021 to 2023. I think we learned another from 2023 going into 2025. But first off, I want to say that there was this big success, and it's why these lessons matter. We remained a large, relevant organization that elected people down ballot, even when we were losing members. We still have high membership totals, and we've proved ourselves able to grow when there are political upsurges. We didn't collapse, although sometimes it felt like it might be on the card. And in fact, we continued to strengthen our ties with labor and elect new people. We influenced protest movement. But we did have this sustained membership decline, and I don't think it should be lost on us that it happened under both of the last NPCs. I think in 2021 to 2023, the comrades from SMC and the predecessors of Groundworks set out to navigate the Biden era through a series of technocratic fixes, pressure campaigns, and sometimes heavy-handed measures like the censure and dissolution of the BDS working group. I think that the problem was the central crisis for DSA in this period was not just structural, not just people making the wrong statements, it was political. Biden posed a problem for the left, and we had to try to resolve that by putting forward a clear solution and a horizon of power for our movement. We needed to answer to people, what was the point of DSA in this period? Was it to push Biden left, stop bad Biden policies? Was it to build a political alternative within the Democratic Party or outside of it? We ended up caught between these things. And I think part of that is due to the natural development of our political tendencies and the crises we were always going to go through. But I also think part of it was because we tried to rely overly on just expanding internal structures and continuing, as a lot of people have said, what worked previously. It didn't end up working anymore from 2020 to 2024. Now, I think at 2023 convention, people voted to change this, and there have been some big good changes. For example, the stabilization of the organization's finances. I hope our comms work hasn't been too bad, like the comrade said, because I've been trying my best to write statements that are convincing to people. But I also think this has been where the rubber meets the road in this new period. And I think the comrades in the new NPC haven't really taken big steps towards political independence yet. So this is what I think the second lesson is. If the first lesson is that we can't, if the first lesson is that a political line matters and abandoning political independence is going to create more crises than it resolves, the second lesson is that the natural course of DSA is towards a policy of realignment. And if we want to change that, we need a shared, coherent strategy around which we unify a majority of the members that we can put forward in convention resolutions, uniting the Marxist or the revolutionary caucuses and putting forward an alternative vision for DSA we're willing to stand behind. Otherwise, we're going to end up continuing the same policies we were continuing before, just complaining about it as we do it.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Now we're going to move into the closing statement section of our forum. Thank you everyone so much for being here. So we'll have 2 minutes each for closing statements, and we're going to do Nate first. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah. So yeah, I know I've been rather critical on the panel, but I do want to thank R&R for putting together the event. I think it's a great discussion, and appreciate everybody for hopping on. I do just say I actually really agree with some of Sarah's points about, I think that the big debates within DSA and on the broader left were really political, and it was because DSA and the broader left was caught in this problem of basically being in this coalition with the Democrats in what was essentially the unpopular ruling party, right? And this question of how do we relate to the unpopular ruling party? And clearly they were very unpopular because they lost re-election by a lot. So, there's a lot of merit to really putting forward, a vision of DSA candidates that are independent from the Democratic Party establishment. And I think going forward, though, the political conditions are also very different going into the Trump administration, right? Where that kind of pressure and schism within the left, I think, is going to be less relevant, and our external fights against our class enemies are going to be more relevant. So I'm hoping that, going into the Trump administration, things are going to get really tough, especially right when Trump gets in office. And I think so far, I think the NPC and a lot of caucuses have been saying a lot of same stuff on this panel. And I've seen, there's been a lot of constructive relationships on the NPC for passing some plans around the inauguration. And, the timeline for, I know Mug has this great proposal about sanctuaries of solidarity and doing resistance campaigns at the local level. So I look forward to doing a lot of that work, and I look forward to all of us, working together to elect more down ballot socialists. And I hope people come around to the idea of running a socialist for president in 2028.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. Next, we're going to have Jesse.
Yeah, I'll echo thank you to R&R for putting this together. In closing, I would just say that when it comes to purges, I am definitely not going to purge anyone. In fact, it would be me getting purged first. I think we can all admit that. And as far as what we're working on up here, there's a lot of stuff, even in terms of ballot measures, that's been really successful. So when we're talking about successes that DSA has had, Michael already mentioned Raise the Wage Everett, which gave people in Everett one of the highest minimum wages in the country, which itself was based on Raise the Wage Renton, which was based on Raise the Wage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These have been DSA campaigns. And so I hope that we can all see that that DSA is strongest when we have this multiple tendencies that are working together to work on things that are important to them, whether that's ballot measures, whether that's sending electeds into office, whether that is mutual aid projects. I do think that moving forward, one of the things I'd like to see most from the left-wing comrades is moving beyond just bashing the Democrats. We don't want to be Lindsay Lohan in Mean Girls, who's so obsessed with Regina George that all she can talk about is how much she hates Regina George. And I think we have to have a positive vision of what socialism in the US is, whether that's building stuff at a local level or whether that's sending candidates to office. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. All right. Next we're going to have Jake. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, thanks, comrades, and thanks, Arnar and Spencer, for facilitating. And yeah, appreciate the comments and discussion here today. Glad to be part of the talk. Yeah, I mean, I think what we should be looking at over the next few years is a kind of scattershot development of our independent political party, again, of, by, and for the working class, where I agree that our national level electoral work is insufficient to meet the moment. And unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit of building the independent political party work in this city, in this town, in this state legislature in a scattershot way over the next years as we build up a stronger and stronger NEC. So grateful for the folks on the NEC who've been working toward that goal. And at the same time, I think what we should be doing as DSA comrades is having a sense of clarity and unity around why we're all doing this. And that clarity is going to come in part from contrast with what the Democratic Party is doing. I mean, we are here because we're democratic socialists and not just Democrats. And I think we need to have that position really clear for other people as well when we talk to normal working class people who are not in socialist organization. And that needs to be front and center in why we're doing all of the very tiresome and grueling work that so many of us do. So political clarity and resisting that kind of unity that is going to be really pressured on liberals, on folks on the left, on progressives throughout the Trump years, resisting that and staking out our position, working in coalition when it makes sense, but staking out our position to always put forward that political clarity is going to be some of the most important work we have ahead of us. Yeah, thanks, comrades.
Great. Thank you, Jake. Next we have Genevieve.
I think for me, like, the closing thought here is that I think that if we're not obsessed with winning, then we're doing something wrong. Like, we're here not to be in a little social club with our friends. We're here because we deserve the entire world. Like, and we can get that if we decide that we're willing to, like, build power and seize power and take it. And that's hard. It's really, really hard to do. It involves holding your nose and doing a lot of uncomfortable things. But like, I think that our responsibility is to not try to like reverse engineer some 3D chess strategy, but is to like look at what turns the most people into organized socialists and keep doing it over and over and over again. And if we have some like thing in our head about why some certain strategy that is doing that is wrong, and then we do it and it's like it's achieving that thing of creating new organized socialists, it's our responsibility to go look and say, we maybe had some wrong assumptions. We need to chase what's working because we're not going to wait around for this anymore. Like, we can build this in our generation. I also think that like in doing that, it's important to look at, like, we're going to come to debates and we're all going to say kind of the similar things with like a lot of different like buzzwords. But it's important for all of us as members to look at who is actually achieving this stuff, who is actually electing people to office, not once, but consistently over the course of years and co-governing with them, who is building and winning unions and like building and winning reform caucuses in the large existing unions. Like, who is doing that stuff? Because everybody can come and say stuff that sounds nice. But like when we're deciding who's going to run the organization, look at who's actually doing it and be suspicious of people who tell you, sure, I've never done any of this stuff, but all we need to do is wave a magic wand and just like get rid of these people and stop this from happening. And then suddenly we'll unlock this like big thing and everything will win. Or like suddenly capitalism's going to collapse tomorrow and then the working class will put us in charge. Like, be suspicious of that. People who say that are either ignorant or they're lying because they don't believe we can actually win. And their horizon is just winning control of one specific organization. Like, yeah, what I want to leave people with is to have the courage to actually try to win this stuff and to do that without holding ourselves back with assumptions that we built by like reading stuff from 200 years ago from completely different countries because they didn't have blueprints. They looked at the conditions around them and did whatever it took to win. We need to look around us and do whatever it's going to take to win and be brave enough to do that.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. Next we have Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Today we face a working class with a myriad of concerns. A kind of a general lack of enthusiasm in general for politicians or political platforms. I'm sure Thanksgiving dinner was really exciting for a lot of you. You know, giving workers the agency and tools for them to see their interests be represented in society is going to be key, not just today, but it is a socialist and a socialist party's eternal purpose. We want to raise all workers, all members of our organization and all working people to the level of revolutionary agents that can seize political power for themselves as a mass organization. We must look at undemocratic institutions, the courts, the Senate, businesses, and a lot of others as barricades to realizing real democracy. An industry run by working people, and our electoral work ran democratically by the same class of people. This is our immediate task. And all power to the workers should be our call, showing the mass of working people the obvious undemocracy that they currently live in and compare it with a framework that allows them the agency to reclaim their lives. By creating a democratic, disciplined, and accountable electoral network, this gives true representation for the working class. And within the NEC, this is what our immediate task should be, to establish a true democratic socialist society without the sham of bourgeois democracy. This means an independent political party with accountability, which is obviously something that is not present in the current major political parties. To quote Genevieve, we deserve the entire world. And only through a massive, organized, democratic, independent, and disciplined movement can we achieve that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And last, to close us off, we have Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for being here. I think this was a really interesting and informative panel. I have learned a lot about party building over the last year. Watching an actual campaign be carried out in Portland taught me a lot. It's a very hard thing to elect candidates, even when they're running essentially as Democrats. But I don't think it's so hard that this can't be done. We have an exceptional opportunity where I think we can convince thousands of people and grow our movement. And we can also set ourselves towards a clear horizon of power. In fact, I think we kind of have to do both of those things at the same time. To convince people, we need to be engaged in sustained, principled mass work on a programmatic basis. That is to say, we need to be fighting all across the board, but fighting for clear principles and articulated positions that we keep telling to people as we do it. That's what it means to be building up the base of a party. But we also need to have some clear steps and strategies in mind for what we're going to do to make this happen. 2025 convention is going to be a critical moment for DSA, and it's going to be a massive test for the left of the organization, such as it exists, right? I think comrades are right to say that there is a challenge over who has got stuff done. And if we want to convince people and win things over, we have to be able to show that we can get stuff done in DSA. So I think there's some things we can do if we work together and have a set of proposals we can pass. I think we can have a proposal to run a slate of candidates in 2026, some in Democratic primaries, some as independent. We can have a proposal for a program that actually unifies our work and gives us a coherent shared message. I think we can have a strategy to bolster and coordinate the NEC for stronger campaigns, SIOCs and chapters across the country, and running independence and fusion campaigns now. I think we can have a plan to run someone for president in 2028 on a clear basis of political independence. And I do think we can build towards a dirty break within the next 4 years. If you agree with those ideas and you want to help, I encourage you to join R&R. You can fill out the link on our website, and I hope to work with you all in the coming years to build a socialist party. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I just want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists, all the caucuses that participated, and just, yeah, thank you everyone for attending. I posted the links to different caucuses websites before, but I'm going to do that again. So you can check those out if you're interested in any of the caucuses here. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We kept it to an hour and a half. Wow, really cool. I didn't expect that, but thank you, comrades. Keep fighting the good fight. All the best in the struggles that we're engaged in. And yeah, see you out there. Have a great rest of your weekend, everyone.
Bye, comrades. Take care. Thanks.